Alright, hello and welcome back to Dan's Astrology. Today is February the 4th, 2025, and Venus has just ingressed into the sign of Aries. My previous video that I recorded was about Venus conjunct Neptune and the North Node in Pisces, and I have to admit that I've been taking a different kind of approach to my astrology channel than other people because I have a certain interest in philosophy. And in my last video, I was kind of going into some philosophy that I've been reading and stuff like that. This video, I'm probably going to stick more with just the kind of mundane quality of it. And mainly, I'm just talking. I have to admit also that I'm basically just reacting to the recent postponement of the trade war with Donald Trump, which is really not much of a surprise to me. And I think that if you followed along and watched my previous videos, that you would be, you could see that I was insinuating that I was kind of expecting this to happen. I can't say that I was making a hard prediction that this was, but I was basically suggesting that if you were going to use if you're going to have astrology in mind in the sense of electional astrology, and you were going to plan a trade war, to do it when Venus and Neptune and the North Node are conjunct, does not really seem like it goes very well with a trade war to me, because I mean what I said in my previous video is that something about Neptune has a lot to do with this kind of Christian attitude of turn the other cheek, forgive and forget, this kind of love your enemies, all this kind of thing, right? There's a with Venus being the sign, or Venus standing for peacemaking, being in harmony, and Venus being in an exalted position, that there is a sort of strange kind of optimism or positivity kind of underlying all this, that it just seems to not really. And it was also interesting if you consider the Mars retrograde in Cancer, which is basically Mars, the god of war, in its fall, meaning in a sign where it's not comfortable, meaning so you're bringing the idea of war and conflict to trade, with primarily around stuff like groceries, or it's like bringing the idea of a battle to your you go preparing a nice home cooked meal or something like that, by that what should be an environment of nurturing, of creating kind of warm, friendly, hospitable, that is now fraught with a war against our neighbors, right? Rather than when you go to the grocery store, you're not just there to plan a meal for your loved ones, or to plan a nice dinner party and to be socially and friendly. It's every time you go to shop, it's all about war. It's all about how to crush the enemy, basically, right? So and I think that kind of attitude goes a lot with having Mars kind of out of place in the third decan of Cancer, which is a very kind of domestic, kind of nurturing, kind of motherly kind of sign, and with Venus being in this kind of exalted peace. It's to me this just seems not really what I would elect for a trade war, or I'm not entirely surprised it's not happening. I also have to admit that, the thing to Astrology 101 here, that the planet Neptune is often associated with illusions, delusions, right? Fantasies, right? Things that you dream up in your head, but they have this stubborn knack where they fail to materialize, that you're living in this kind of fantasy dream that doesn't quite ground into reality, or that you are trying to realize something that's not very grounded, that is kind of maybe a bit too idealistic or something. This is all stuff that goes with Neptune and with Venus, Venus and the North Node and Neptune together. It just seems like it doesn't seem like a good time to actually put plans into tangible action and carry it out and execute it, right? So what's funny about all of this is that they're not canceling the trade war outright, but they are postponing the trade war for 30 days, apparently. And the thing about this, too, is that I already mentioned in my previous video that we are going to be having a Venus retrograde. And if you actually look at the timing of this Venus retrograde, I guess when you look at the trade war, it's 30 days from what? 30 days from today, or 30 days from February 1st, when the trade war was supposedly supposed to start, or I don't know what day it's supposed to be from. But if we look at, when Venus stations retrograde, it's going to happen around the 2nd of March. So that actually times up fairly well with this 30-day gap, right? So that we've got a supposed trade war that was supposed to start when Venus was conjunct Neptune in the North Node in Pisces. Now we've got 30 days of Venus in Aries leading up to the supposed start of the trade war. And then as the trade war is supposed to start, Venus slows down and stations retrograde in Aries, a place where Venus, there's something about Aries which stands for independence and having that Mars warlike, it was a Mars ruled sign, so you have that Mars thing going on. So that sort of goes with the trade war, but also keep in mind that when Venus is when any planet is retrograding, it slows down, so that you're going to be picking a moment when Venus is slowing down and gradually backing up and then gradually going the other way. And then I should also remind you that there's, if you look at the other planets involved in all this, I would think that Mercury would be Mercury, obviously the scribe, the one who makes negotiations, the one who makes deals, the one who plans things or whatever. If you look at Mercury, what Mercury is doing around that time, on that day that Venus, March 2nd, 2025, when Venus stays in retrograde in Aries, guess what Mercury is going to be doing? Mercury is going to be conjunct Neptune perfectly at 28 degrees of Pisces, with the North Node now at 27 degrees. So it's like, and the need I remind you the dignity of Mercury in Pisces, that Mercury is both detriment and fall. It's like a double detriment for Mercury in Pisces, because this is basically a very kind of poetic, sentimental emotion. Like it's probably going to be a better time to be like writing poetry or like love letters or something like that than to be planning a trade war, right? It's like, so there's this kind of thing like where you're kind of like the one who wants to make deals and negotiations and trades may not be very grounded in reality, maybe kind of awash in this sort of sentimental fantasy, and not really the best to be planning or to be making negotiations. And then meanwhile, Venus will be slowing down, going the other direction. It's just it's like, I don't know. I'm kind of, if this is like the astrology around the trade war, I kind of feel like we don't have to worry about it very much, or like maybe we're overreacting a little bit, or maybe you also have to consider that I tend to be focusing on this trade war thing because I am a Canadian, but there's obviously other problems at hand here, such as recently in the news, Elon Musk apparently is trying to destroy this thing called USAID. There's a big commotion about that at the time that I'm recording this, and that may be for Americans or people abroad who have some investment in these kinds of charity organizations, that may be a bigger concern, maybe, right? And there is something interesting about how there's something about Neptune and Pisces that I think kind of goes with this sort of idealistic kind of charity, kind of like helping people out kind of thing. And it's kind of interesting that the North Node, to me, this could be like there's something about how the North Node is a malefic. There could be something about the malefic quality of the North Node on Neptune creating a kind of like the hungry demon head is swallowing up all the charity programs. Something like that could go with this North Node Neptune thing. It could also have to do with boundary issues of like, with if this is how this Musk Trump presidency is going to go, then there's going to be some need for some enforcement of some boundaries, maybe. And there's this kind of idea that like of Neptune is everything is just sort of like unbounded and flowing together, and there's no there's a certain thing about this Saturn and Neptune that goes with limits and boundaries that could do with either border security or with limits to charity, or I don't even know. There's something about, but I think there's something about the Neptune quality that wants to be idealistic, wants to give, wants to help out, but is not maybe grounded in reality, or is maybe a bit diluted by ideals or lofty principles, but is kind of detached from the reality of the situation, right? There's also something about all this which I would simply describe as the bullshit factor. And I think there's something about this sort of like bullshit factor that may go with the North Node and Neptune conjunct, because it's sort of like, it could be similar to like the whole like red pill, blue pill thing, right? Where you're taking like Neptune is sometimes associated with things like pain relievers, right? Like you take some sort of medication, it doesn't solve your problem, but it eases some of the discomfort of your symptoms, or you're on like palliative care or something. It's interesting too, like the idea of pain. I was listening to, if you're watching the news for the trade war, what I find kind of interesting is like the use of the word like pain, like, oh, we're gonna make them hurt. Like, it would hurt a lot more if we were in a real fucking war, right? And you were actually using physical violence against us. There's a lot of products that I could easily just not buy. And I'm not going to be in pain at all. I don't give it. I mean, of course, if maybe if your business is affected by the trade war, then you'll be in pain. But this is like this is a very, there's a certain kind of idea that like by working things out at the level of trade and at the level of business, there's a certain kind of a civilized legal legality where we're not just going to be kind of bashing each other over the head with clubs like cavemen. You know what I mean? Because we have a certain trade and barter system of civility and sophistication that we don't. It's kind of like we don't need to make each other hurt for this. And there's something about this where it's like, if you were to be like, we're gonna create this situation that's going to be really uncomfortable, be really painful for you, and we're going to do it while Venus is conjunct Neptune in Pisces. It doesn't make any sense, because it's like Venus, certain astrologers were maybe using the idea of Venus and Neptune and conjunct Neptune in Pisces as being like a spa date, a place where you go and unwind and let go of all the tension and frustration, and then just relax in a bubble bath with candles or something. Like this isn't the right thing that you want for a trade war. This is more like, oh, well, we'll just, it's like 30 days. We'll just take a little vacation, take a little like spa retreat, 30 days, put the fucking facial mask on and put the cucumbers on our eyes, and then come back 30 days later. It may not even be happening because Mercury will become, it's just a bad dream. It's just like, we've all just been tripping out on this like, we'll just take a vacay, everybody, right? Like that's kind of more the vibe. Um, but what was I gonna say? There's a certain kind of like bullshit factor that I think goes with politics in general, and I think the bullshit factor kind of has to do, I mean, I usually use Pluto just for the idea of corruption, but there's also this kind of bullshit factor, as in yeah, I guess you could go with this red pill, blue pill mentality. I try to avoid that though because I don't really like how it's been wrapped up in this kind of like incel culture online of like frustrated people trying to date or whatever. Um, but there is still this basic idea of like having some kind of useful illusion, right? And I think there's people like Slavoj Zizek. I kind of go with what Slavoj Zizek says about this, where there is like, rather than like, there's this idea that we have to have a false personality, we have to have a mask, we have to have this sort of like participate in this kind of like collective fantasy that we all put on, because if we were to get to the real truth, it would be kind of like uncomfortable, or there'd be something there which would be too awkward to get into. So we have to like create a kind of a lie, create a kind of a fantasy, and I think that Neptune kind of goes with that in many ways. And there's something about the way that it's been they're using this idea of like Canadian border security to try to rationalize the problem. But I honestly think that like, to me this seems like an idea, like the whole tariff idea. You get all hot on tariffs thinking this is going to be your master plan, and you come up with a reason afterwards. You decide the tariffs are going to be your strategy, and then you come up with reasons to justify them, and you just make stuff up about like the border security or because I mean, there's obviously going to be some. Like, do you really think there's that many people spilling? Like, they've you notice how they pivoted, right? Whereas first it's all about like migrants and refugees, or like illegal aliens crossing the border, and now it's all about fentanyl, right? Like, these are two separate things, and like if you look at the statistics, fentanyl going into the States from Canada is actually going down over the last few years. Like, we're actually making progress in if that is a problem to even worry about in the first place, it's becoming less and less of a problem as time goes on. So it doesn't. But it's okay, if the Americans say that that's the problem, it's kind of at this point it's kind of just like obvious that it's like bullshit, or that there's a certain obvious amount of bullshit in the whole situation. But there's certain things where it's like you have to understand that in politics there's always going to be a bullshit factor. There's always going to be a certain level of illusion, but it's kind of like, there's just to be a little bit like, the emperor wears no clothes, where like you kind of have to like, sometimes you just have to like play along with the bullshit, even if everybody knows it's obviously like the kind of problem with it is that with this level of bullshit, it probably takes more effort to like unpack exactly why all this stuff is either lies or not real or bullshit than it is to just accept that we're probably just going to be inundated with a lot of bullshit for a while, and we're just going to have to get used to it and not take it seriously, and then without having to but there is this, I mean, this is, I also, this is part of the problem with fascism, is now that we live in a world where you can't really rely on the media or the narrative to be true. That it's basically that people are going to like do things not because for factual reasons, but just because they feel like it, and then to try to get some sort of outcome or result they want, regardless of whatever the reasoning is. And it feels kind of disorienting. It feels kind of crazy. But that is, I think, part of the problem when you combine the malefic quality of the North Node with Neptune, which is kind of maybe detached from reality, lost in a fantasy, in a kind of, a kind of governmental, institutional psychosis, right? Where, what where now our leaders are basically crazy, or the whole premise of the trade war itself seems kind of insane. Um, but the thing is, even before, this is the problem is that there's always been this bullshit factor. I basically, I think that part of what makes life so complicated is that we can't just deal with things directly in a blunt kind of direct way, that we always have to run everything through this sort of like, this consensus reality, which is really just a load of bullshit, right? um And so, I mean, I guess, I don't know. I guess I could also suggest that if you notice that I have this poster up with Gurdjieff on it, it says, believe nothing, not even yourself. And that is, I like, part of the reason why I'm putting up this Gurdjieff poster has to do with this whole circumstance leading into this trade war. And where we're constantly being told one thing's going to happen and then something else happens, that maybe it's better just not to, maybe it's better just to be skeptical at this point in time, right? It's all, and I was also talking about in terms of, it's interesting, this whole thing about the UFOs and the drones and all that, in that there's a news thing recently about how the FAA somehow, they say they solved the drone mystery by saying that, oh, actually they did give people permission to fly a whole bunch of drones around in New Jersey, or something like that. They're trying to like just like erase the mystery around it, which is like the kind of thing of, I don't know. I don't think they're. I don't know if I should get into this. I have to admit, personally, I don't have I don't have any firsthand experience with this. I don't have any sort of special insights to offer, but there's something about the this whole thing about Donald Trump and the post-truth, right? This kind of like problem of not knowing what is real. What I think is kind of funny is that this isn't even just not knowing what is real. It's like being worked up, everybody being told that one thing is going to happen, and then it doesn't happen, and it's not that it's not that, or like it's not really so much that the you're allowed to change your mind if you decide you don't. If you decide maybe it's better not to have a trade war, you're perfectly allowed to like say that, maybe this wasn't such a good idea. Maybe we're not going to take this plan of action. Maybe we're not going to have a trade war. But it's another fact of matter to say that like the reason why we're doing this is X, Y, and Z, but all those things are all just lies, and then you're going to like cancel it for some reason, but not admit that the reason why you're stopping it was because you're kind of inventing false reasons to do it in the first place, right? There's this kind of thing about, or trying to like come up with retrospective explanations for things that happened a couple months ago that don't really explain anything at all, just to sort of pretend that there isn't a problem, or that there isn't any reason for suspicion. It's kind of like there's certain pervasive bullshit factor, which I think as an astrologer, this kind of comes with the Neptune and North Node in Pisces, and as eventually this year we're going to get Saturn conjunct Neptune, both of these planets moving into Aries. But I think there's something about the Saturn and Neptune which could, it's like the cloudy water, right? It's like you're not seeing things clearly. There is a fog of ignorance. It's like, or the muddy waters that you're not going to see through, right? There's some kind of cloudy, obscured quality to the Saturn-Neptune conjunction. It could also have to do with things like Trump being old. It's also interesting to notice that with Venus in Aries now, that Venus is now ruled by Mars in Cancer. And at some point in time, Venus in Aries will make a square to Mars in Cancer. Or it's already making a whole sign square. But the thing is that Mars is in a retrograde in Cancer, and Donald Trump has Mars in Leo. In the summertime, around May and June, we'll have Mars in Leo and Donald Trump having a Mars return. Now, I don't know if there's anything particularly worth predicting around this for Donald Trump, because, Mars takes about 2 years to do a complete revolution of the zodiac. So, a Mars return happens once every 2 years. People go through Mars returns all the time. I don't think it's necessarily all that significant. People tend to put more emphasis on the Saturn return, the Jupiter return, because these are things that happen at longer periods of time. But, it is a thing. He will be having his Mars, the transiting Mars, conjunct his natal Mars in Leo. And, that at that point in time, whether or not we'll be having a trade war, it should be fairly obvious what's going on by the time we get to May and June. But it feels the whole thing like he's playing a game of chicken, right? Like he's just like is he gonna do it or not? Are they playing chicken with us or something like that? And a lot of this, I think that a lot of this has to do very much with, like I said before, Mars and Cancer, like turning something which is like shopping at the grocery store into a battle with your enemies next door, which is kind of like, you're not gonna go to war. We all know that Trump isn't going to like go to war and invade Canada like the Nazi blitzkrieg, and you want to have a fucking grocery store war where we stop buying these Californian strawberries that taste like cardboard, that we stop importing fruits that are like covered with wax coating and that are these like bland, lifeless, factory farmed stuff that barely resembles food. I think we can live without this. Thank you very much, right? And like, I don't know, are we going to be putting? There's yesterday we took the Canadian whiskey off the shelf. No, the American whiskey off the shelves. But the thing is, I don't know. Like, has anybody actually tried drinking this stuff? Like Jack Daniels, Jim Beam. It's not very good. I don't think we really need it. Like maybe we could just leave this stuff off. Like we could leave all this stuff off our shelves for a whole month while you guys wait around and figure out whether you want a trade war or not. Maybe it's also possible that maybe once Mars is out of Cancer and Mars is in Leo, we might have a dynamic that's like the aggressive martial area energies of Mars will be directed in a way that's like a little bit more like we're not just having a passive aggressive you know, trade war kind of thing going on, that maybe there will be your aggressive energies will be directed in a way that's more appropriate, perhaps. I don't know. It's also, I mean, also kind of a bit ridiculous how a lot of the whole conversation around the trade war has to do with, you know, American manufacturing going overseas, or American manufacturing, you know, like the idea of like when you go to a random store, how many things say made in China on them, right? How like, and that even, or like this idea that, but like, you know, what's the tariff on China? 10%, right? And yet you're going to be giving Canada 25%, and we are about the size of California in our population, and yet nobody's worried about Canada being the new superpower. People are worried about China being the new superpower. People are worried about China having this huge industrial base, and yet you know, they're only going to get 10%, but you're going to gang up on Canada because Canada doesn't really pose a threat to you. It should be pretty obvious that this is not going to work very well, or that this is kind of like counterintuitive to the whole trade war dynamic. I don't know. I basically think, given the astrology, I think that the trade war is probably something we don't have to worry about. But there's also this kind of issue that maybe with like the idea of stage magic, maybe they're just using this to create a media spectacle to draw attention away from all this other bullshit that they're doing, and then it turns out that the trade wars would never materialize, and it's really just a smokescreen so that Elon Musk can gut the American government, fire all these government employees, and, you know, maybe that's what you have to worry about instead, right? But, you know, it's also kind of, like I said, we've got Mercury going into Pisces. Like, I don't think Mercury in Pisces with Saturn, Neptune, and the North Node is not going to be a very good time for making level-headed decisions, doing things rationally. I'm sorry, it just isn't. So I'm just saying, I don't know. I'm just giving you, this is my take on where we're headed at this point in time. I'm not particularly, I don't know. I'm not feeling so enthusiastic about recording this video because I feel more confident when I have a more of a philosophical kind of approach, or more of a theory or an idea going into this. But I'm just basically just giving it to you based on the most recent developments that we've had. I'm going to leave it at this for now. Thanks for watching. Do.